topics here in this in my presentation with Nicole, who I understand has worked in this space as well. She comes from sunny Brisbane, so it would be nice to contrast also the smart city adoption between Melbourne and Brisbane, and where we've seen sort of differences with respect to the different city citizens' perspectives on this matter, and just draw out some of the cultural differences as well that we had in the presentation earlier between other Asia-Pacific regions and the countries that exist there.
Hi everybody, I'm Nicole Stevenson. I'm a privacy consultant now, but I started my career in public sector privacy and public sector privacy policy, both in Canada as well as here in Australia. My primary place of influence has been in Queensland through their privacy regulatory framework, working first in their old information standard and then moving into the team that developed the privacy law that now exists in Queensland. One thing that's very interesting for me to unpack is how smart cities will integrate the vendor and city relationship when it comes to how privacy is regulated. That's very interesting to me because vendors have, on balance, a completely different privacy regime that they have to apply, where cities, to my knowledge in Australia, all are governed by their various state privacy regimes. So there's an interesting intersection there that I think we'll probably unpack a little bit with Grace today, because there's a massive risk area there as far as I'm concerned, and I think it's worth everybody's while to think a little bit about that.
Yeah, and during this session, really welcome everyone to sort of like stop us and just ask us questions as we go along, trying to keep it informal and trying to make sure we can get to lunch sooner than later as well. But I guess I'll kick it off by a question that I wanted to sort of pose to you, Nicole. So when you think about all the different technologies that exist in the smart city context, what do you think are the ones that would actually sort of garner the most privacy risk or most privacy criticism from its citizen base, do you think?
So, I mean, this is probably where the privacy advocate in me is going to become quite obvious. And so before answering the question, I think that I should probably preface my comments with a general caution about what privacy is. Privacy is about the protection of personal information, and that's a very specific thing. And the way that we give effect to those obligations in Australia is almost entirely principle-based, which means there's, you know, a little bit of pendulum swinging, and there's a fairly long bow that can be drawn in some instances around how we tackle some of these issues. That's important to keep in mind as we go along through this conversation, because there are varying degrees of support when it comes to adopting pro-privacy strategies. I am a privacy by design advocate, which is basically building privacy into your systems, into your decision making, into your policies and procedures, into everything you do, as opposed to having to bolt it on later when you discover that there's a problem and citizens are upset and complaints are being made. So just keep that in mind, that's the perspective that I take, and certainly when I deal with my clients, I ask them the tough questions about, well, how are they building privacy in as opposed to bolting it on? And in the smart cities context, because this is happening now and growing now and maturing now, there is the opportunity to build privacy in. We don't actually have to make mistakes here, right? And so, in terms of the technologies that I'm seeing, you know, it's not actually the new ones that cause me the most concern. It's the things that are around now that will probably be leveraged off in order to grow our smart cities. So, for example, your councils that go off and buy, you know, 100 or 10,000 CCTV units that have your audio and visual recording capability, where the data is stored by a cloud provider in some sort of environment, without having first undertaken a privacy impact assessment of that CCTV system. That sort of activity is of concern to me. Quite apart from the policing angle, right? I have all respect for law enforcement, and I do believe that certain technologies are very important for preventing crime, moving crime away, changing how crime operates in a city. So, and from a privacy perspective, the use of something like CCTV for the prevention of crime or for following up after a crime has occurred, that stuff's covered under privacy law. It's the having not done the privacy impact assessment first to figure out how the privacy law applies to the activity that you want to put the technology to. That's where the concern is for me with CCTV. Other things like your RFID tagging on equipment that you might find in, say, council-run buildings, hospitals, bus and train stations, and so forth. That is a great way to track items or equipment to ensure that they're not stolen or damaged in some way, or combining your RFID tracking with your CCTV systems is a really great way to follow up when things do happen. But again, that does generate a level of data that an ordinary individual operating in society, thinking that they're being anonymous in doing so, may have some concern with. What do you think, Grace?
I think that makes sense. I think, these technologies are going to come into play in smart city context, but I think the difference about whether citizens will actually adopt it or actually protest against it is whether or not the councils, the governments are actually engaging in the conversations back to the citizens about the benefits that will come out of it, and actually allowing the citizens to make an informed choice as to whether they want to participate in that tracking. Because as I mentioned, there's it's a cultural thing. Privacy is a cultural thing. If you ask the same question to an Aussie about, are you okay about me tracking your personal information registered on your travel card, and you sort of ask that same question and link it to your concession card information as well as your travel history, the answer was no in that case that we saw with Opal. But if you would then apply that same context in another city where they're very open to being surveilled by their government, like Singapore, and they've seen the benefits associated with actually being surveilled in that smart city context in Singapore, the answer from the citizen may be different. And so that's where I think we need to be sort of conscious of the cultural differences, and also have that opportunity to have that engagement back to the citizens to determine whether or not their tolerance level is in your expectation as a government or a private vendor.
So based on that, on the Aussie example, where do you guys, as privacy professionals, see the Privacy Act and the regulation actually going? I know we've had a small step now with the data breach report now there, but where do you see it going in the Aussie context? Because I'm coming from an environment in Europe and working in the US as well, where it's a lot stricter. And certainly that drives us as a security professional how we control and protect that data. But now we've given that as an example here in Aussie where it's a bit more relaxed as such. So where do you see this going in the context of the Privacy Act and smart cities?
So I think that's really valid. As Grace was talking, I was just about to say something about that, because I think our definition of privacy and our understanding of privacy, what it means to us as citizens, is changing. Would you all agree with that? In the past, I mean, certainly, honestly, when I was in university, email didn't exist. That's actually really scary, because now I live my life that way, right? And this whole idea that technologies and opportunities are there for us to enjoy as citizens, that they're there for us to enjoy, but they must be balanced with what our understanding is of privacy and protecting our personal information. When I first started my career in privacy, it was all about the right to control what personal information was known about me and the right to interact with my society anonymously if I chose. So if you look in a smart city context where I have this opportunity to use an app to book my bus or train transport and to find the locations to access that transport easily, that app is gathering data about my travel preference, and when I get on a bus or a train at a particular location, something else is then tracking that I used that app to get on that bus or that train at a particular location and that I went from A to B. I'm no longer interacting with my city in an anonymous way. And I do see that, as Grace said, without proper community consultation, it's going to bother some people. I don't particularly have a view about whether it's a good or a bad thing. I think everything can be a good thing if privacy is tackled appropriately from the outset.
Kate Sherrod, University of Adelaide. I'm a little curious what you're saying about Australians being so concerned about things, because my experience teaching my university students is that they are appallingly naive and indifferent to privacy. You know, I keep warning them about just how they can be killing their career by what they're posting on Facebook and Instagram. And they're still like, yeah. And so, who are these people who are concerned? Because my students are concerned.
Yeah.
And so I'll follow on from that question. Because one of the things I noted was, do you think it's a case of citizens saying one thing and behaving in another way? In terms of how they want their data to be treated? Because my observation is like, people are becoming very lax with what they share on social media, etc.
They're not sharing information with their government. Right. Privacy laws in Australia kind of need to control what the government do about this. The Australia Card debate in the late 1980s, that's what kicked off privacy in Australia. I think that young people have a completely different, I'm still a young person, I have the old person view of privacy, but that's because I do this for a living. I think young people see privacy as controlling what is known about them and having a choice and acting.
Sharing economy is all about mashing data together to generate new information, new services. And I would look at the privacy risk mitigation tools that you have been raised before, and putting on my tech hat, I'd go, that's just going to slow innovation down. It will strangle creativity and innovation. So how can we pitch, I guess, privacy in a fast, agile, moving environment so it's seen as a supporting the neighbour? Yes, it's a cost. It's a cost to it. And as opposed to, I guess, tech companies, councils, cities looking at it and going, that's just going to slow my deployment down. If I have to do a privacy impact assessment every time something changes dramatically, etc., it's going to add costs, it's going to add time to my project. How would you approach that?
I think it goes through sort of building privacy by design and all elements of the project lifecycle. I think where it slows it down is like you're in pre-launch mode, you're about ready to hit that button, and you go, and then you actually go to your legal counsel, your privacy officer, or so forth, and say, can I do this? And of course they're going to have that reputation of being the office of no, because, well, the answer is no. You should have engaged us up front, and you should have realised that health records, for example, cannot actually be transferred outside of Australia. That's a direct legislative requirement, but you're already down the point of actually adopting that cloud service solution that's going to bring those health records outside of the Australian jurisdiction. That's obviously slowing you down because it's against the law. You're going to have to unravel that contract that you've established with that vendor, and you're going to have to look for alternate ways to now store that data you're collecting about your citizens in the health context. So it's looking at the privacy by design up front in that regard.
Sorry, I'll just follow on quickly. I didn't have the benefit of being here earlier today because I was traveling. How many in the room are from the city environment or will be doing the procuring to add smart solutions? Yeah. Okay. We have a university. So you're looking at engaging smart solutions. How many vendors? A couple. Okay. I would suggest if you are in an environment in Australia that's regulated by a privacy law, whether it's the state laws or the federal law, get yourself an in-house privacy officer. Have somebody that has as much clout as your CEO, your CFO, your CIO, your CSO. Get a CPO to get in there and run a team and get privacy moving quickly. This is what they're doing under the GDPR now in Europe. Everybody has to have a data protection officer. The data protection officer cannot be the information security officer or anyone that has anything to do with procurement. And that's because the person in charge of privacy is supposed to be able to ask those frank and fearless questions about what is actually happening to personal information and work with the organization to make sure that it's done in a reasonable and meaningful way, privacy-wise, from the outset. So I would suggest if you don't have one, get your chief privacy officer and build your privacy team, and then you can do what Grace has suggested, which is start building privacy and by design from the outset. Yes?
Other point here, not a question rather. So you talked about your products that already use rules and ways and so forth. And then we talked about the government agencies for the smart cities context. Now, I personally, as a person, I'm not able to share my information with product companies to get better services. And I kind of, I'm not wrong, I have a little more trust that, yeah, you're just saying that they are taking care of my private information, they will. How can we bring that trust factor in the government organizations as well? They are bringing all the assessment that probably goes in the Facebook zone going.
So do you think your trust has to do with the fact that if you're unhappy with a service or the way they handle your personal information in the private sector, you can self-select out of that relationship and go find another provider. Go to another restaurant, go buy your clothes somewhere else, right? I think the lack of trust with government, with cities, with the state government, is because we can't self-select out of that relationship as citizens. If we're not happy with the city, it's really hard to pick up and move cities. That's just not something that most ordinary people can do. And so I think that when Grace mentioned your community consultation, that's part of your privacy by design at the outset, is ensuring that people understand what happens to their personal information, why it has to happen that way, and what the city's doing to increase benefit to them by leveraging off of their personal information.
For a couple of years now, I've been working with Estonia, who have, they're the world leaders in citizen ownership of their own data, managing privacy and so forth. And when you go to Estonia, you're an e-citizen, you've got one card, everything's on there, your health, your banking, everything. And anytime the government accesses some information, they have to notify you. You get directly if you eligible to government look at these records for this purpose. And the other purposes, they have to ask to access your information. So it's a trust system based on mistrust, comes out of the KGB era. And it means that private, so like I go to a hospital, which is digitized, I get a prescription done electronically, no piece of paper loose, turn up to the chemist, give my e-card, there's my drug, everything is just sort of seamless, and there aren't any trust fears. So what's stopping us doing that? You can't say it's distrust, because that was based on distrust if we never had a KGB troubles again.
I actually think here there's no, if you're in Europe, if you're in Paris or Germany or even Scotland, there's a protest thing built into the culture. So generally, if something like that happened, there would be book out the streets with protesters and people behind them. But people here don't really care.
Yeah.
You know, it's fine. You know, so I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier. There's generally that Aussie attitude. Well, it's fine. You know, so I think that's what's going to drive.
Yeah, I think we didn't grow up in a society where that personal information was used against us, whereas Europeans in general, that you know, we look at what happened in World War II, right? Your ethnic origin, your ethnicity, your religious affiliation is what got you, you know, to death and so forth. So there was that level of mistrust during that era, which has then resulted in that being built in the legislation, which is why we're seeing the GDPR come into fruition over there, is that it really does not want to repeat what had happened in the past with the additional collection of personal information about our citizens now that we're living in that digitised world. But yeah, like I know for sure, like we can already, if Aussies were so carefree about government collecting data about us, it always begs the question, then why isn't the adoption of us having e-gov account actually higher then? What are we scared of, like, of establishing that and having it all interconnected so that the government can better serve us?